has left Chelsea. This is what Chelsea's statement said. They've just issued this. The sporting director came out and said, on behalf of everyone at Chelsea, we would like to express our gratitude to Mauricio for his service this season. He'll be welcome back to Stamford Bridge anytime, and we wish him all the very best in his future coaching career. This, of course, is a Chelsea side who laboured early on in the season, but in fact, they would finish 6th, which is a 19-point improvement since Pochettino took over. I think it surprised everyone as we welcome in Frank Leboeuf, but we'll start off with James Olley. James, what the heck's happening?
Well, you say it surprised everyone. I do think to some extent the writing was on the wall a little bit here. If you follow this club closely and you've seen the gradual deterioration in the relationship between the owners and Pochettino in the last sort of 6-8 weeks, I wouldn't say this was a foregone conclusion, but this was an outcome that was starting to look quite likely from the way that Pochettino was speaking. You know, increasingly in public, he was struggling to hide his frustrations with the way that the club was being run. He's not the first manager to feel that way since these owners have taken over. And obviously, the owners' side, they've been frustrated with the lack of progress. They've obviously been this huge outlay on players. They felt that they should be challenging for top 4 minimum, not be scratching around to try and get into the Europa League. And really, I think both sides had kind of, I guess you say this with the benefit of hindsight, but I think both sides had sort of decided where they were at before this end of season sort of flurry of wins, really. It's almost as if those 5 games they won right at the end of the season were just a coda to a decision that had already been made. And the two parties met in London on Monday and Tuesday to discuss the way forward. And I think there was a feeling among the hierarchy at Chelsea that they might look to go in a different direction. And honestly, I think Pochettino had reached a point where he felt like, do you know what, if you guys want to do that, I'm not prepared to fight it long enough and hard enough to stay on. So maybe this is the best thing for all parties, to just cut our losses here.
What was the heart of his frustrations, James? What was really getting under his skin?
Well, look, I mean, there was a lack of public support from the board for the last sort of 2 or 3 months. There was one interview that Todd Burley gave when he was speaking at one of these financial functions where he talked about the beautiful football that Chelsea were playing of late. But really, I think he was annoyed at the fact that there wasn't that clear vision of where Chelsea were trying to go as a team.
The two sporting directors that have put their name to that statement, where is the angst, discord, where is all this coming from, this sort of separation of the vision of what, you know, Graham Potter and now Pochettino, that's Thomas Tuchel, that's 3 managers. 3 experienced managers, one maybe not quite so much in Graham Potter, but certainly the others are hugely experienced, and they've all gone. But, you know, where's this vision coming from? Because, well, let's be honest, the actual money men behind this, they're pretty clueless when it comes to this sport. They're business people. So then you're hiring sporting directors who I would imagine are fighting over themselves to see who's getting the biggest cake at the end of the day. You know what I mean? It's like one of those contests. So who's making the decisions? That, you know, that's what I want to know. Who's going back to the owners and saying, not sure about this one either? It has to be those two, Winstanley and the other guy. And it's all a bit of a mess. I mean, honestly, it's just... they talk about vision. Come on. I mean, don't get me wrong. He wasn't without fault this year, but they did finish strong.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
As James said, he's been throwing things out in press conferences for a few weeks now about his future. But they just don't have a vision. They're stumbling from one manager to the next, and they're going to do it again.
Craig's got James back for us.
Yep.
James, to that point, as Craig says, obviously the owners aren't particularly experienced in this sport. So who is going to him and saying, you know what, Pochettino's not the right man?
Well, okay, so my understanding of this, and it is very much a moving feast because it seems to change from week to week almost who has the influence here. But obviously when they bought the club, Todd Boehly was kind of front and centre. He was the interim, he put himself in as the interim sporting director. He kind of did all the transfers. He was sort of the go-to man at the club. He made himself very accessible at the start. Now, over time, Bowley's kind of taken more of a back seat, and it's actually Bedadig Barley who's kind of more involved in the day-to-day overseeing of what's going on, obviously overseeing the two co-sporting directors. Now, those two weren't supposed to be co-sporting directors initially. They were going to bring one in before the other, but because they couldn't do that because there was an issue with gardening leave, the other guy got in first, and then they went, oh, okay, well, we'll make you co-sporting directors at the same level, right? So that structure was never supposed to be like this. But I think one of Pochettino's frustrations is that there are so many voices in the room. So, you talk about trying to sign a player. You've got the two co-sporting directors who have their input. You've still got Todd Bowley in the background, and you've got Egg Barley who does like to get involved. He is still quite actively involved. I think it's quite significant, for example, that Bowley had dinner with Pochettino separately on Friday. He then saw him at the training ground on Saturday morning. He flew back to America. Egg Barley then saw Pochettino separately, and then Egg Barley, Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart met with Pochettino on the Monday and the Tuesday, and then he's been fired. Well, not been fired, but he's decided to leave, the mutual consent, however they want to dress it up. He's gone today. And that tells you that he's had to jump through those kind of hoops to leave the club. So you can imagine what it's like when he's trying to get a player in he wants, or he's trying to get a coach in he wants, or he's trying to make some sort of meaningful change, or try and get a grasp, a handle on what the bigger picture is, what the vision is. And I think that frustration at that lack of clarity, we've really seen it from Pochettino in the last few weeks. And really, we've seen it on the pitch, right? Because, the piece that I'm doing at the moment for the site, it noses on the idea that Cole Palmer, who's been a fantastic player for Chelsea this season, probably their best signing, they didn't want him last summer. He wasn't their first choice option. They tried to sign two other players in that position. They tried to get Michael Olise from Crystal Palace, and they botched the release clause. They tried to get Mohamed Kudus from Ajax, and he ended up going to West Ham because they got involved in that deal too late. And it was only in the final sort of 2 or 3 days of the window when Cole Palmer became available, when Palmer and City were talking to Brighton and they were talking to West Ham. The fee then was about £25 million. What did Chelsea pay? 42.5. Now, it looks great business now, but it was mad at the time because no one really knew how good Cole Palmer was going to be. City obviously were thinking, well, we're going to get maybe 25, maybe a little bit more million for him, for a player who could have some potential. Chelsea came straight in. Now, that one's paid off. But if you're the manager who's trying to oversee all of this, and remember, Pochettino was in the building then. He started work on July the 1st. That deal took place to bring Palmer from City on September the 1st. So all through that process, Chelsea thought they were going to be signing other players in that position, and they've ended up really lucking out that Cole Palmer's been as good as he has. Credit to Pochettino where it's due for getting that kind of form and consistency out of him. But that is just one example, I think, of the sort of haphazard nature of this squad building that leaves the head coach, whoever he is, in a very difficult position. Because remember, all of these guys are on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year contracts. They're not going anywhere. So if anything, when it doesn't work, it's on the head coach.
Frank, the last few weeks you've been positive about Chelsea. At last, for the first time this season, they put a smile on your face. They wiped that off today.
Yeah. It's a very strange ending and a very bizarre one. But you know what? When Pochettino made a comment and a post-conference call about what he wanted, what kind of player he wanted for next season, he talked about experienced players. And I thought to myself, wow, that's strange. It's not at all the idea of the board who is going to the trading business system, and they're not going to change their mind. So at that time, I said, well, maybe something going on right now, or maybe they change their mind, which I doubt about it, because they all think about money. And we can see now that was the beginning of kind of a revolution from Pochettino. And I think the guy knows his job, knows what he needed, but it doesn't go with what they want. So it's a pity because at the end of the season, it was better. Some people, and Steve was saying that it was better because they had nothing to play anymore and they become exceptional for the past games. But we don't know what we're going to face next season, really. It's still shaky. We don't know where we go. With all young players, you never know because there is no basics. It's just static. They're just grounding the future. And I have doubts about the fact that it could be better than this season. It could be, again, ups and downs like we saw this season.
Another manager coming in, Shane.
Listen, nothing about this makes sense. Let me rephrase that. Nothing about this makes footballing sense, in my opinion. It makes perfect sense if you put it in the perspective of how this ownership group has run Chelsea ever since they arrived. Just, 4 or 5 weeks ago, we were talking and kind of laughing about Todd Boehly doing that interview.
The 2.5 matches.
And last 2.5 matches have been absolutely fantastic. It shows that things are finally starting to take shape. That run had extended to 5.5 matches to the end of the season, and then this news. So for me, it says that either Todd Boehly or the rest of the ownership group, there's some kind of a disconnect as to where they are or where they feel, what they feel the direction of the football club is, and in whose hands it needs to be. Now, according to the statements, they want a new, younger manager to come in. Wasn't that supposed to be Potter? Wasn't he supposed to be the next young, upcoming manager to take over Chelsea and lead them in the right direction? But given his youth and his inexperience, he couldn't handle what's happening behind the scenes at Chelsea Football Club. So why would any other young manager be able to handle this kind of disarray in getting Chelsea back on track as to where they were? I felt Pochettino, given his experience at a number of clubs, including some rather dysfunctional ones in PSG, could and started to get Chelsea back on the right track. Yet he's just now another victim of that disarray, and I'm not sure where Chelsea go from here.
I think Graham Potter and his staff and probably Pochettino were quite glad to take their payoff and get out of there and get away from the revolving carousel of players coming in, particularly back in the halcyon days of the early part of this ownership. But you remember, we go back to when they first bought the club and they were out front, Todd Boehly in particular, spouting about this and that, and all-star games. And we said at the time, this is a circus, and how are they going to run the club? Never mind all this spiel. And as James has just pointed out, with all these meetings and different meetings with different people and that person, and co-sporting directors, there's just too many people involved trying to make the big decisions. The big decisions, there has to be a real just core element. And that's the manager, it's a sporting director, and the man that's the face for the money, right? And you sit there and you hash it out. You don't need all this other sideshow that's going on. And that's what it is. It's a sideshow. There are too many people involved. And I think, even without people that don't know much about the footballing side of it, when you have the co-sporting directors in there as well, who, unless by some miracle they agree on everything, it's going to be a mess. Of course it's going to be a mess.
De Zerbi? Is that the next manager, James?
I don't know. I don't think they know. Honestly, I really don't think they know. I think that there's a desire to get someone in who, a sort of panacea, who's going to be a manager who can inspire a young group, but also has the experience to be able to tell a World Cup winner, for example, in Enzo Fernandez, what to do. I mean, you look at that list. Well, this is it. But this is it. But, we joke about that. But what's really changed in 12 months? The squad profile is obviously very, very similar. And if you've identified characteristics in a certain manager that you want to lead that particular group of people, it's not going to be any different 12 months on, is it? I mean, we're looking at those lists there. I cannot believe that Thomas Tuchel would go back after the complete breakdown in relations between him and the ownership. I mean, there was a total disconnect there by the end. Amorim's obviously attracted a lot of interest from Premier League clubs across Europe. He does have, I believe, a release clause at Sporting Lisbon. He's 39 years old, obviously very highly regarded across Europe, but an unknown in this league. Could see that one maybe. Kieran McKenna, that would be a huge, huge step up for him from, the fantastic job he's done at Ipswich, back-to-back promotions, back in the Premier League for the first time in 22 years. But really going into a club like that would be a huge step up. And then De Zerbi, of course, famously someone who never has any issue with any authority above him.
And Robert, I'm a big fan of De Zerbi, but he had a very up and down season, finished in the bottom half. And Kieran McKenna, we covered the Championship playoffs, back-to-back promotion, as James said. He's He's a left field thinker. Yeah, young man with a really bright coaching and managing future, thinks outside the box, brings in all these different strategies for training and all that, but that's just too big a jump. Yeah. And if Chelsea, I don't know if they've had I don't know if Igbali and Todd Bowley have popped their head above the parapet and noticed that there are a couple of other big clubs, at least, who are, one in particular is hawking itself around the globe looking for a manager in Bayern Munich and can't find one.
Yep.
It can't find one suitable and has gone back to the previous manager, the current incumbent, I don't think he's left just yet, and Thomas Tuchel, who might have gone back, then he decided not to. And then Man United, who I think if there was anybody decent around and they could afford it, would probably sack Ten Hag on a whim, probably after the FA Cup final. It may happen, it may not. But the big talk there is, but who's out there? Because Liverpool, they were looking for a manager, and they managed to find this Dutch guy, Arne Slot. We don't know how that's going to work. So there's not really many out there that you would say, that's the guy, yet they come out and say, I tell you what, there's plenty of fish in the sea. We'll just fire him because nobody else, there's no other big clubs looking for a manager. So we'll fire him and we'll see what happens.
Who do you want? Who would you want, Frank?
Craig. Who do I want? I don't know. Not Tuchel, because I think it's impossible for him to come back. I don't know for the others. You know, apparently they want a new coach to train, so an experienced coach to train inexperienced players. So if it works, we can call that a miracle. I mean, you have the picture of the best club in the world, which is Real Madrid. Ancelotti, I think, is a little bit older than I am, and with experienced players, and it works. It works with no defense, with players being injured. And they take not young players like Nacho, like also Rudiger, experienced players, and it works. And they are the best team in the world with maybe Manchester City. So why do you want to take the other way to think that you're going to be successful when you know nothing about football? That's becoming upsetting for me because you have an easy path to follow. And you look at the other clubs, how they work, and maybe try at first to do what they do, and maybe go on your own way when you know and when you are becoming successful. But it's not going to work. We see some clubs like Leipzig trying to do that, but it's different. The mentality is different, and they're not trying to be Chelsea. Chelsea have a history, and you are trying to change everything. And the new coach, because I said that when Pochettino signed, he cannot change anything. He changed for 6 games and a half, maybe, and maybe it worked, but that's it. And the new coach will start a new era, let's say, therefore, he's going to need time, therefore, he's going to lose games, therefore, people's going to be upset again.
On that list, although it wasn't a great season in the end, particularly when they've gone out of Europe, but I like De Zerbi's philosophy, style of play, but as James said, he's got a bit of a hot head.
Yeah.
And I think he'd get frustrated. The structure at Brighton is excellent. You've got Tony Bloom, who's the owner, you've got Paul Barber and David Weir, and De Zerbi's talked about them, talked about how good they are behind the scenes, at loan signings, at recruitment, and Brighton have been one of the best at recruiting and selling for a huge profit. The structure...
To Chelsea.
To Chelsea, particularly. Brighton is something that these managers can go in and quickly realise that they can work with the people that are there. It's uncomplicated, but it really works. Chelsea's the opposite. Lots of money to spend, lots of people involved, very complicated, a lot more pressure, and you're walking into a bit of a mess. Whether he would want to do that or not, I don't know.
Pochettino to Manchester United, James?
It's not impossible. I mean, they have spoken to him a couple of times before. I don't think it ever really went anywhere on those 2 occasions, but he would obviously be a manager of interest to them because, as Craig quite rightly says, there's a lot of top clubs out there who are looking for managers, and it's not as if they're having their doors knocked down by all these fantastic options. So, no, look, I mean, as far as United are concerned, there is a view within the FA that they're expecting perhaps an approach from Manchester United for Gareth Southgate this summer. I don't know whether that will happen. I mean, it's a complicated one with Gareth because obviously saying win the Euros or they get to the quarters or even the quarters or the semis, they're going to be engaged in Germany until sort of early July, and United would start their pre-season. I I've got a feeling they come back on something like the 5th of July. So it's, when the tournament's still going on. So could you really have a new manager taking over when the team's starting on this pre-season plan? That would then lend itself to a manager who's out of work. And obviously, there's been a lot made of United not having a lot of money and headroom on PSR for transfers. And clearly, if they could get a manager of someone like Pochettino in for free, no compensation, no fee, no exit, anything like that, then, the appeal would be there. And, I think he would take it. I think he likes to stay in England. I think he loves, he's just done his 400th game, I think he was, and he was talking then about how much he loves English football. So I think he would be open to it if they came for him.